This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Aggronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belgast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again. Time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 153. Tonight I'm joined by Ashgar.
Hello.
Kodra.
Howdy.
And Tam.
Hello.
And yes, we're back to Tam instead of Tamriello. Because I'm lazy. We are down a Thalen and we are down a Grace. And we, for a period of time this evening, we thought this was going to be the Kodra and Bell show, and that was not going to be the best of ideas, probably.
Probably not.
So, just a random statement, as I sometimes do. I've never had a prism in my eyeglasses before, and that's
some.
Yeah. So, okay, when I got my eyes checked this last time, the doctor told me your images aren't lining up. And I'm like, okay, how do you know that? He goes, the entire time you've been sitting in this office, your head has been leading to one direction. And apparently, sure enough, like one of my eyes was lower than the other one once he separated them. And how the hell I wasn't having double vision, I am not entirely sure.
Because your brain is magic.
Yeah, my brain was literally ignoring my left eye at all times.
Yeah, just your brain is magic.
So I now have an adjustment on one side, and I got my glasses this week, actually like Friday, and man, that's a thing. Getting adjusted to like having a prism in your eyeglasses. First of all, it's like I can feel my left eye trying to work all the freaking time, whereas it never used to, apparently. And anytime I move my head rapidly, it's like my eyes have trouble focusing for a second. So that's not related to anything other than it is really weird to play video games in that mode.
Oh.
Especially anything with fast movement.
Ooh, yeah.
And they said it could take, I don't know what kind of site I found, but they specifically said it could take a fortnight to get used to the glasses.
Well, I guess we'll talk to you in a fortnight.
I guess.
Or in whatever remains of a fortnight.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my world right now. Is as I'm running around Quarry Mill, I'm trying not to do so very quickly. So one of the things like I talked about last week was Skyforge, and I just wanted to do a quick addendum that in the meantime I have done a little research into the game and installed the PC client just to see what the differences are, and they seem to be functionally the same. And apparently everything that I like about the game right now went in about a year ago. There was like some patch where they introduced all these new systems, and that was apparently what made the game instantly playable to me, whereas it wasn't really that enjoyable before. So basically everything that I have said about the PS4 copy, you can largely apply it to the PC too now, because it works the same. And I believe you can even install it through Steam now, so that you don't have to trust someone other than Steam with your money if you ever buy anything. So
how far have you gotten into it?
I have liberated 5 regions now. There's a big world map, and each region has like 6 areas in it or so. And one night I just burned through a bunch of stuff, and I've seen a bunch of different kinds of content. There are some interesting boss fights that happen, which I wasn't really expecting. Like, I was not expecting to get dropped into what was essentially a primal fight, for lack of a better term. But it's a weird solo primal fight. So there's an NPC that you're basically helping out, and they're doing some of the heavy lifting in the fight. But you have to, keep stuff locked down and make sure that, the spawns don't overwhelm the NPC while they're fighting the actual big bad.
So is it solo bosses you're fighting?
Yeah, and I would imagine you could probably fight these with a group, but everything that I've done so far has been solo. Other than the big open world areas where you're just dumped in there with a bunch of other people, but you're not actually grouped up.
So it's like pseudo Destiny-ish.
Yeah, it's very Destiny-ish. Like, the more I play of this, the more it reminds me of, oh, this is fantasy Destiny. Because, like, everything that Destiny is doing, this game is kind of doing too. Like, it has a very similar PvP mode. You've got, soloable content that's like the story missions, and you have dungeon content, which seems to be 3-player content. So it's a really similar experience from what I can tell. But, I mean, the Destiny model works really well, I think, for a pseudo MMO, to where you just need enough interaction to be able to do interesting group content, but also largely soloable.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a feeling like in the coming years we won't even refer to those things as MMOs. Like, those are just games. On a whole other level, it reminds me of Phantasy Star Online as well, which was very similar to that model. I want to say it was either 3 or 4 people in a dungeon.
I think it was 4. I guess later Phantasy Star games are 4.
I don't remember, honestly. It was either 3 or 4. I can remember that much, but I think it was probably 4. That seems like a more common group size than 3.
Now, combat is hotbar combat?
Combat is, so it is technically hotbar combat, but I've been playing it entirely with a controller. And when I played it, on the PC, I used an Xbox 360 controller, and it played just as smoothly as it does on the console. So they've worked out whatever kinks for, controllability. And it was pretty slick, because it recognized that I had an Xbox 360 controller, and it reskinned all of the control interface buttons to look like the traditional, Xbox 360 controls. And then I hooked up a generic controller, and it gave me kind of a more generic version of the controls. So it somehow was able to identify which controller I had hooked up.
Now, are you still, targeting enemies and then casting abilities? Are you aiming them?
It's an aimed. It's an aimed thing.
Okay.
The other thing that went in that is kind of interesting is, as you're fighting combat or fighting stuff out in the world, various weapons will drop that are limited duration abilities that you can pick up and then use. So there are cannons that you can pick up that the enemy forces have dropped, and you can target things and burn them down with the cannon, or you can throw the cannon at a target and it'll overload and it'll nuke a bunch of stuff in a area around the cannon. So I don't know, it feels like that mixes up the combat quite a bit, especially if you're out in the world and just about to do a boss. That greatly speeds up the boss is if you have one of these special weapons that's just dropped and it stays on the ground for a limited amount of time, and you can pick it up and use it, and each one has different abilities associated with it. But the negative that I found that I didn't talk about last week was getting additional classes is the problem with this game. That's probably so there's 2 things that have come out this week. Grace started playing it after the podcast last week, and she said it has the most atrocious boob jiggle she's ever seen. And she had to dial the slider all the way down just to keep from being distracted. And that's not something I had actually seen, because I was playing a male character, and the NPCs, for the most part, stand still. So apparently that is a problem, and that is not something I knew about the game, so that's kind of a buyer beware sort of situation. That's a thing. The other thing is you were limited by default to Paladin and Cryomancer, which is their mage, and Lightbringer, which is their healer, smite priesty type character. And you would have to unlock all of the other characters if you wanted them. And there's some really interesting ones, but they're deep inside the campaign. So, first of all, you have to have cleared to whatever map their temple is on. And secondly, it costs 3 million credits. And that's an in-game currency, not a cash shop currency. There is some kind of conversion between Argents, their cash shop currency, and credits, but I don't know it off the top of my head. So I don't have this is this many dollars. So 3 million credits seemed like madness. However, by the time I cleared through the 4th map, I had almost 2 million credits. So, and that started speeding up rapidly as I got up in level. So in theory, hopefully there is a point where 3 million credits is not that big of a deal, but it still makes for a miserable experience if you are not interested in any of the 3 starter classes. I feel like that's kind of the Achilles heel of this game. I mean, because there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can play, but you have to be a healer or a nuker or a tank to get there. And like,
I remember actually liking their Cryomancer, despite not normally liking caster classes.
I like it too. Like, that's the weird thing about their Cryomancer is like it's a caster that I kind of dig, and I like their Smite Priest thing. It's also kind of fun, but it feels like it boxes you in really tightly to playing this thing and grinding enough to be able to unlock the thing you actually want to play. And I don't know, like, I feel like the Marvel Heroes model works better for this, where you have all these different champions that you can try out, and then you get to choose which one you want to unlock and be able to level all the way to 60. And had they done something like this here, where like, oh, you get to try all these things out, and then you have to commit to one of them by like level 10.
Yeah.
And then continue on, and that would be great, because like I could see, Tam digging the Earth Mage thing.
What?
Well, there was like a
Gravity
kinetic
Mage.
Yeah, Gravity Mage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was the one you were looking at last week. The kinetic, I think.
Kineticist, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and they look kind of Earth Magey. I mean, in some of their attacks. The Slayer looks interesting. And all of these I've played for a little bit in the training hall, because if you play through all of the classes, you can then unlock an outfit from that class that you get to take from that point on if you want to wear it. But yeah, it's the game has like a lot of positive things going for it, but then I don't know, like I feel like it is really limited and really grindy if you don't want to play a paladin or a light bringer or a cryomancer. But I mean, for me right now, it's kind of filling the same niche that Destiny did, where it's that thing that I can play for 10-15 minutes and feel like I did something, and then shut it down because I was waiting on my wife to get home so we could go eat dinner, or I was waiting on something for a few minutes, and I can have a little bit of gaming and then go off and do something else.
Makes sense.
The other thing that happened this week is nostalgia hit me, and I have reinstalled Star Wars The Old Republic, and my god, is that the worst patcher ever.
Oh, that patcher is garbage.
It is horrible.
Wait. Competition with, like, what, Secret Worlds?
I feel like it's worse than Secret Worlds.
I also agree, actually.
Like,
Secret Worlds is pretty bad,
but Secret Worlds doesn't start and stop like 10 times, it feels like, trying to download various parts before it finally actually completes. Also, it was going super slow. Like, I was getting less than a meg down most of the time. And it straight up cratered my hard drive and thrashed it while it was downloading, which is another problem, to where I really couldn't do much of anything else while it was downloading. But, so like, I feel like there was this sequence of events that happened, and I am totally going to blame the tiny Jyn Erso that at Celebration. So did you not see the images of this?
I did.
Okay. I'm going to blame my Twitter feed being bombarded with tiny Jyn Erso giving all these different Leia's Death Star battle plans.
That was the most adorable thing I've seen.
It is. And that was kind of like the final trigger, because like, so around Celebration weekend, I am always super nostalgic about Star Wars because all this information is coming out about Star Wars. So that was like strike one. And strike two was the fact that I just came off Andromeda, and I have a lot of love for BioWare at this very moment. And then tiny Jyn Erso being adorable, making happiness in the world. And then, yeah, it was kind of like playing Hearthstone getting me back into World of Warcraft once upon a time. It's the same thing. So I've been playing some SWTOR, and oddly enough, picking up where I left off on the Sith Sorcerer that I never actually finished the storyline for. So that's functionally what I've been doing today while it's been rainy and nasty out. Just piddling around and doing that. And like when I first said this, I think it was Tam that was like, why?
I'm still in that camp.
I mean, you played it recently, Tam, and you really enjoyed the stories of it. Right?
I did. And I guess I totally get, like, playing through all the class stories, because they're really good. Like, a solid 5 or 6 of the 8 of them are really good. And even the 2 that I don't think are very good have enough good moments to make them worth it.
And the only negative is...
Which 2 do you think are not good again?
Jedi Consular, and I couldn't care less about Bounty Hunter, but I know some people really like it.
Oh, I liked the Bounty Hunter quite a bit, yeah. But I do think... the problem with Jedi Counselor is it weaves in and out of the Jedi Knight story, and the Jedi Knight story is way better than the Jedi Counselor.
Yeah.
And especially, like, comparing it to the way that Sith Warrior and Sith Sorcerer have resolved themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works really well that those two, that Sith Warrior and Sith Sorcerer are both...
I guess Inquisition, or not Sorcerer. Yeah, Sorcerer is a subclass, but yeah.
But they have they're telling very different stories about a very different kind of person.
Right.
Like, you know, one of them is a very political, it's like a weirdly political, you know, knight story, like
right.
Fighter story. And the other one is this kind of scheming occultist story.
Well, it's like this search for forbidden power, functionally.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other side, you have the Jedi Knight story that's just like this amazing heroic romp. And the Consular story is just, I don't know, you're an arbitrator, sort of. Maybe. Maybe. I mean, I feel like if you really loved the first few minutes of Phantom Menace, like what they were doing before shit goes wrong, then maybe Consular is your story.
See, the thing is that I did, and it wasn't.
Okay. But, like, I never actually made it through Shadows of Revan content. And that was kind of... I got caught up in the whole, get all the classes to 50 and get through all the story. And I never actually started Shadows of Revan, so I kind of regretted that, because I've heard it is an amazing story.
It's pretty... It's really good. Like, I'm
what
sort
comes
of being...
after it was much, much, much better.
The Shadows
Fallen
of
Empire stuff?
Oh, the Fallen Empire stuff is really neat, and I haven't gone back and played more of it.
Yeah, like I've not played any Fallen Empire stuff, and I've heard the stuff that comes after Fallen Empire is really good too.
Yeah.
So like, it was one of those things. Like in the back of my head, I knew someday it would fire it up and play through some stuff, and I've kind of been looking for something I could play downstairs since I don't know. Like my laptop is a reasonably good laptop, but like a lot of the newer games don't run as well as they do upstairs, so I just don't like playing them. I've kind of gotten snobbish about games. I mean, like I could play Andromeda downstairs, but it looks ugly as hell. So we were talking just briefly about this before we started the podcast up. What the hell is with the Pyramid Head Bomberman character? That's the weirdest character to put in a Bomberman game, as far as I'm concerned.
It is. It's Konami mining some of their properties, because they remember that they have those, apparently.
Yeah, and there's a Simon Belmont, too. Like Super Nintendo, Super Castlevania era Simon Belmont. And I guess I could see that one, but, like, man, like, I mean, I guess Pyramid Head is the iconic character from Silent Hill.
Basically, yeah.
Other than the faceless nurse.
It sure seems like Konami is just in the business of mining their properties for whatever.
It's kind of sad times. So, I think, Ash, you had started to say that there was like a bunch of changes to Bomberman on the Switch.
Yeah, they've been adjusting things. Like, it runs at actually a higher frame rate now. They adjusted the difficulty of some things. People seem to like what they've done to it.
Cool.
Which is a surprise to me because it released to not stellar reviews.
Well, and it was, you know, what, a $50, $60 game?
Still a $50 game, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, okay, digitally it is, but man, have the prices elsewhere have been cratering on that game.
Because I've seen a million copies of that game basically everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I've seen it like down to in the 30s on Amazon for a physical copy.
Around here, basically any place carrying Switch games has a lot of copies of that, few copies of 1-2 Switch, usually a bunch of copies of Breath of the Wild. You would think no other physical games exist. Actually, I'm not sure other physical games do exist.
I did play a little bit of, speaking of Switch games, Wonder Boy and the Dragon's Trap.
I also played a bit of this game.
That game does not message very well, the very first part of it.
What do you mean by that?
Where, like, if you don't go the right direction, it puts you right back at the start of the game. Did you have this happen to you?
There are some doors. Some of them go back to the start, yes.
Yeah, it's like... It took me forever to figure out exactly what they were wanting me to do, and it kept just warping me back to the start. Well, like, crap.
Oh, I didn't have that problem for an extended period of time.
Yeah, it was like it was whatever room that I was supposed to go down. I did not realize I was supposed to go down, so I just kept walking off the side, and I kept trying to go up or something, and yeah, no, I kept warping back to the start. I did not play it at PAX South.
It was actually it wasn't at PAX South.
Oh, it wasn't? Which one was... Oh, Monster Boy was...
Kingdom was at PAX South.
Okay.
What I didn't realize is that this game is a remake, in some respects, of a Master System game.
Did not know that.
Like, if you click either, like, the L button or something, it will take you directly to the Master System visuals. Because they didn't quite remake it as... Well, they remade it, but they remade it exactly as it was. Almost.
It definitely did not feel as high of fidelity as I was expecting. Like, hit registration, things like that did not feel that amazing.
Things as much as possible identical to how they used to be, so much so that you can even play it with the old graphics.
I mean, I am sure I will get my $19 worth out of it, and I'm kind of shocked that, like, it's not coming out until significantly later on Steam.
It's out on the other consoles already, though. But it is a Metroidvania of sorts, where you play you play a thing that turns into other things. So, well.
What other things?
Well, you start the game by getting cursed into a mini Godzilla.
With a very powerful fire-breathing attack.
I mean, how much of a curse are we talking about here?
You have 1 point of health instead of 12.
Ooh. That seems intimidating.
But that one heart seems to go down pretty slowly.
Yeah, your one heart is not exactly, like, doesn't instantaneously go away.
But also this semi-ranged breath attack. Like, I didn't have any problem with, like, killing stuff before it actually got to me.
Except for the stupid clouds.
Yes. But, like, for most of the land-based enemies, no, they weren't a big deal.
I don't know, it's distracting me from the Metroidvania I was playing.
Hollow Knight?
Yep. The game is kind of big. I didn't realize how big.
What little I've seen of it seems like, yeah, it's like the levels are really huge.
Levels are huge. It seems like I don't know how many of them there are because, well, you don't get to see any part of the map until you have been there and found the cartographer in that location.
Like, aren't you basically just going around all of this one bug kingdom? Functionally, like, it's different parts of a bug kingdom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're exploring the Kingdom of Hollow Nests, which I made it to the former capital city, which seems to be the former capital because everything is dead.
That's unfortunate.
And all of the dead things are attacking you.
It's even more unfortunate.
It's a little weird. It's like, this game does remind me of Dark Souls in a lot of ways, starting with, you get the story in bits and pieces. The second boss, you don't actually kill, and she runs around telling you things and threatening you after that, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to fight her again at some point. He sort of fills you in on some things that may have gone on at some point. The cartographer himself may fill you in some things that have gone on at some point. It's also the small matter of that when you die, you lose all your currency.
Interesting. Now can you recover your currency?
Sure. It's sitting on your shade, which is where you died, which will, by the way, will attack you.
Fun.
Your shade will?
Yes, your shade will attack you.
Well,
that seems terribly unfortunate as well.
That seems really bad if you die in a boss room.
Thankfully, if you die in a boss room, your shade is outside of the boss room.
Oh, that's good.
Man, that's nicer than Neo is.
Fortunately, like, there is no... Like in Dark Souls, your souls serve as both your currency and your experience, but this doesn't really have a experience. It's more Zelda-like in that you collect pieces of heart, such as it were, and pieces of your magic meter. Enough of those gets you an extension. I'm really enjoying it. It seems like I'll be enjoying it for quite some time longer if average times to beat can be believed. Apparently it's like a 20-hour Metroidvania, which seems insane, because most of those are way shorter than that for just beating the game.
So is there just not a lot of optional content and you pretty much have to do everything, or?
No, apparently it's also a lot of optional content.
How long was this in development?
I have no idea, actually.
It's a fairly small team, isn't it?
Team Cherry? I think it is a very small team.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I've largely held off on it, because I would really kind of like to wait until it came out on the Switch.
I'm kind of wary of waiting for anything that doesn't have a date. Like, it's supposedly coming to the Switch and PS4, but doesn't have a date for either one.
Well, I mean, I don't exactly have a drought of things to play either. That's the problem.
It's true.
Like, it's easy for me to say, oh, I'll wait for this because, my God, this year. And my God, the spillover from last year.
That's really what it is, isn't it? Like, everything got delayed into the start of this year.
Yeah.
Horizon, P5, Andromeda. I guess Andromeda wasn't announced for last year.
Still counts.
But I feel like I still have plenty of stuff from last year that I want to play as well.
Yeah, last year was also really, really good.
I mean like Guardian did come out last year.
I've still not
played it.
No, I haven't. I mean, it's not really my thing either.
That's fair.
Like, it seems like a very frustrating time to me.
I have never
a game about herding cats.
Yeah, basically.
One really big cat.
Yeah, I don't really like cats, and I have never really liked the big furry dragon look, so
yeah,
I kind of checked out of that one.
Well, I think the problem with that game is the same problem I have with, like, using horses in Breath of the Wild. Like, the fact that the horses don't exactly, like, follow what you want them to do all the time. And that's what I've heard with the Guardian, is that, no, like, the Guardian really kind of has a mind of its own. And I'm sure that sounded like a great idea until you need to talk it through a level. And just the idea of that game reminds me way too much of trying to play, like, Gyromite with Rob the Robot on Nintendo. Because it didn't always open the gate when you needed it to open the gate. And, like, I feel like I had enough frustration for a lifetime to where I just stopped using the robot and instead would hold a second controller in the other hand while trying to move with the first controller. But I do know, like, some people that streamed their way through it and really enjoyed the experience of playing it.
Just not your cup of tea?
Not my cup of tea, no. I mean, I've tried to play, like, Ico and Shadow of the Colossus multiple times and have never really succeeded, so...
I'm actually a pretty big fan of Shadow of the Colossus.
I have never played any of these games.
Shadow of the Colossus is fantastic.
Although it has an extremely unintuitive control scheme.
Yes. It comes from the era of extremely unintuitive control schemes, as we figured out how to do 3D graphics, but hadn't figured out 3D controls quite yet.
And
it actually works pretty well for what it's doing. It's just not. It is not the standard, as was eventually established.
Well, and Shadow of the Colossus also has some madness when it comes to inverse kinematics.
What do you mean by that?
Like, some of the run animations are just insane, as it's trying to make sure that the feet are always touching the ground.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It gets a little Q-oppy sometimes.
So, another thing that I attempted to do this week was play Warhammer 40k Eternal Crusade.
I'm so sorry.
Now, some background behind this is I was gifted a copy of Warhammer 40k Eternal Crusade, like,
it was
whatever.
Still selling Founders packs.
Yeah, well, it was still selling Founders packs that were like $150. So, like, on some level, I feel guilty for never actually playing the game for any length of time.
And now that you have actually tried to play the game, do you still feel that way?
No, I don't. Now, to be fair, like, I've tried this multiple times since release, and it is just not a good game. It's just not a good game. Like, I know what it's trying to go for, but did you ever play PlanetSide 2?
Yes.
Or PlanetSide 1?
Yes.
Like large-scale combat in this game feels super similar to that, to where you spend all this time running, and then someone shoots you before you can even see where the hell they're at, and then you're back at base, and you've got to run back in. It's kind of the Battlefield problem of, like, you just got shot by somebody you don't even see on the map yet.
Yep.
And fidelity of the weapons aren't enough to where you can, like, actually hug corners and use cover and any of that stuff that would help against that. I mean, so it feels like several generations ago's version of an FPS with loose MMO trapping on it. And like, I really haven't even seen anything to make me think, like, no, it's really an MMO. Like, it's some form of a shooter with persistence of your character, like RPG elements, but not actually an RPG. And it's kind of sad because, like, I know I am probably the only one of us that has any fondness for Warhammer 40k.
This might be true.
And, like, I've always thought it would be a cool world to have an MMO in, and not necessarily like modern Warhammer 40k, but like the Rogue Trader days. I mean, because Rogue Trader felt like a pen and paper RPG, not a like war game. Like it was really confused as to what it wanted to be, and the part of it that I really liked was the pen and paper aspect of the game, not the tabletop aspect so much, other than the fact that I just kind of had a fetish about Citadel miniatures. But yeah, I don't know, like it has interesting elements to the world. The whole world is not that interesting.
Yes, there are some interesting elements, but
so is there a coherent story?
Look, this is 40k. Let's be real here.
There are vignettes of coherent story, but the little islands of story, the little islands of story don't always link up.
So what options do you have to play as?
You can play as an orc, and you can play as an Eldar, you can play as a Space Marine, and I believe a Chaos Marine. And then from there, you have various loadouts that are, you can be an Assault Trooper. You can basically be various miniatures from that army list. And after playing it for a little while, I feel like Eldar is probably the correct answer, because they have more interesting like subclasses that you can play, because like all of the aspect warriors from Eldar are lovingly put together in this game, whereas like Space Marines, it's just no, this is just some different loadouts.
I mean, so what you're saying is they apparently spent more time in the parts of that setting that are more interesting?
Probably,
because that's what I think I just heard you say.
I mean, I think Eldar was added on later, so I know Orcs and Space Marines were in early on when I, alpha tested the game, and I think they added Eldar much later. So maybe they had more time to go over the design. And I mean, honestly though, Eldar always had more interesting things going on as far as the different aspects, because they all felt vastly different. So, like, I feel like there's enough viable source material there that you could make something interesting out of it, but man, it feels like they chose the lowest possible common denominator, shoddiest shooter ever to build the game around.
I feel like that source material is such that it doesn't fit with an MMO very well, because unless you have some crazy, like, constantly changing world, one of the big things in that setting is if there's heresy, the Space Marines are going to come up and just blow up a planet. That's just a normal thing they do.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess after seeing Space Marine, the game, like, I had hope that you could make an MMO out of it, because Space Marine was an awesome game. Like, even if you don't like Warhammer 40k as a setting, you should totally try Space Marine. It was a good, coherent, single-player story that was woven in the Warhammer 40k universe.
It was probably the best hack and slashy game I've played.
And it had really interesting mechanics, like all of the super powerful stuff that you think of as Space Marines being able to do, you kind of had to build up to. Like you had moments where you were out of juice, theoretically.
All I can think of is My Hero Academia right now.
That's a really good show.
This is a really good show. Run around in baggy Space Marine armor, scowling at people, having run out of juice.
I mean, Space Marines, that's always weird. Like, Space Marines have just so much stuff going on. It's weird to think of them like having just a single limited resource. Again, I know 40k from a very weird source, so I don't know how much of it is canon.
Oh, there's probably a version of canon for every interpretation. Like, 40k changes constantly because, they have to retrofit things.
I wish that either the game or the lore, or ideally both, were coherent and fun. Because the minis are great. Like, they still have some of the best minis on the market. Especially if you want to do interesting things with your minis and put them together in interesting ways.
Well, and I feel like
options.
To make Warhammer 40k coherent, they really need to go to the Horus Heresy era, because that's the one time that Warhammer as a whole agrees that this is the sequence of events that happened.
I mean, yeah.
There's really not a lot of radical departures from that era. And that's probably why, when they decided to write a series of books, they decided to place it in that era.
It's always struck me as weird, all of the lore and history, because it really is the fascinating evolution of minis games from historical simulations to fantasy simulations still holding over.
The biggest problem I have with the game is that their resolution is utter garbage, and they fervently refuse to do any math.
They also
math that might get in the way of the simulation.
They also kind of refuse to make any game there that has a coherent set of rules.
Well, so I feel like part of the problem with Warhammer as a whole is the history of Games Workshop as a whole. Because once upon a time, they were a Dungeons & Dragons supplement company. And they produced a magazine that was basically Dragon Magazine by another author. It was just D&D supplemental stuff.
Yeah.
And then they decided, oh hey, we should just make our own RPG, but they had to make it different enough to not look anything like D&D. So you ended up with Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer Fantasy RPG, not Warhammer Fantasy Battle at that point.
Yeah.
But the problem is that set what their system looked like, and every war game that they've come out with uses the same traits.
Yeah, and see, for me, I feel like somebody at some point needed to sit down and do some basic math, at that phase, because it's okay, I'm gonna delve into some mechanics here, but if you are using D6 resolution, you need to understand D6 resolution checked against a stat. You need to understand that different rolls on the die on that one D6 are huge.
Yeah, every pip is a massive difference.
That is a big jump between pips. And so if you say, oh, you succeed on a 5 or a 6, or a 4, 5, or a 6, that's half or less of the time you are succeeding. And so if you get a stat bump, and it's if you get a stat bump and that goes from I succeed on 5 or 6 to 4, 5, or 6, or 4, 5, or 6 to 3, 4, 5, or 6, that is an enormous boost.
And it's not treated as such?
And it's not treated remotely as such.
They hand out +1s like candy to various things.
Well, and when you're dealing with the war, they didn't really in Warhammer Quest or the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the old versions, they didn't really care to do that math and realize how, or it either didn't bother to do it or did it and didn't care that those boosts are like mind-blowingly huge. So when they put together a mini and it's like, oh, okay, a Space Marine costs 25 points and has 4s across the board, and Eldar costs 18 points and has 3s across the board. It's like that's a big difference. And that's like, it is a difference that is not reflected in that valuation. And that like basic thing right there destroys any semblance of functional mechanics the game has.
Well, it's a situation of why, like, it doesn't matter that you have 30 Imperial Guards to 5 Space Marines. Those 5 Space Marines are still going to wipe the board with those 30 Imperial Guard most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the problem with Games Workshop as a whole is it's a whole sequence of let's build our own version of. So they had, D&D, and they built their own Warhammer Fantasy, and then they stuck with the system, and they're like, oh, hey, we should build our own chainmail.
Yeah. Which
was the weird, quirky D&D, skirmish miniatures game.
I thought that was 4th edition.
No. I see what you did there, though.
4th edition is a better version of that.
Chainmail was bad. Like, just straight up, Chainmail was a bad system. It was the same problem that Warhammer Fantasy Battle was from Warhammer Fantasy. It was taking D&D rules and trying to convert them into a, miniature game.
I mean, D&D actually did that later, around the time of 4th edition, not actually 4th edition.
So, this is a weird side conversation, which is kind of something we do anyway.
Oh.
But I know this week, Ash and I both got into NDA-restricted things. Not going to talk about those. However, people don't know what the hell NDAs are anymore. Like, after several generations of things without NDAs, I have been watching stuff come across my various social media feeds, and people just don't understand the concept of an NDA now.
Or they don't care.
Or they don't care, yeah. They
More
just
commonly
don't care.
Don't care.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have successfully glorified leaks.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah. Leaks are fun. Everyone likes leaks. They like to hear about the thing early.
It's just bizarre that so much of the news cycle is actually driven up by these leaks.
I mean, there's only like 3 or 4 things to talk about in games media. There's was X game good? When is X game coming out? Kind of struggling for some more.
Well, and I guess back in the days when you had a magazine coming out once a month, the pressure was significantly lower than multiple publishes a day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't...
That's not a problem specific to games.
It's not a problem. No, it's definitely not a problem specific to games.
I mean, internet media all seems to be desperately seeking substance.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you see thought pieces and thought pieces about the thought pieces and an endless cycle of people talking about what they think about what somebody else thought about what a third person thought about some other thing. And rumors.
Always got time for rumors.
And that's the thing that always cracks me up is like, you'll dig into a story and then you'll find out it's just some rumor that started on Reddit.
Yeah.
And nobody has a clue if there's any validity to it. And I mean, like, I think it would be interesting if, somebody was looking for a reason to have a site, is to dig up old Reddit rumors and then check them against the final product to see how realistic these rumors were. Like, how much was actually guessed ahead of time. I mean,
so I used to obsessively follow like all of those things. I wanted to know as much about every game I was going to play before I actually played it, so I could be informed and know all the things and so on. And I just I really burned out on that. I will look at exactly enough about a game as it takes me to know I'm going to buy it, and then I completely shut down reading or watching or listening to anything about it because I just don't want to know. Like, more information can only make the game itself disappointing at that point for me.
Well, it's kind of the trailer problem. Like, so often when you watch a movie trailer, you have just watched the best scenes in the movie in a very short sequence. I was watching some trailer a couple days ago, and like, I don't know anything about this movie, and I don't even remember what movie it was, but it absolutely seemed like they just gave any possible twist away in the film, like in the trailer. Like they might have had a secret reveal at some point, but by the end of the trailer, they had just given away whatever the secret was, and that seems weird.
I know a lot of people thought that about the new Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man trailer.
So I think we've like wound through the list of things we had talked about before the show. Anybody else have any things they want to discuss?
Man, I desperately want to talk with like basically anybody about Persona 5.
So
that
we were
game
talking
is so good.
We were talking about that a little bit before the show, and like right now there are so many good games out that like it seems like each one of us has decided to play a different one, and they don't have anyone to talk about that game with. Like, nobody has gotten anywhere near as far as I've gotten in Andromeda. Grace right now is standing alone as the solo person who has defeated Horizon. I think Kojer is the only one of us who's beaten Zelda Breath of the Wild, but it's not like there was a lot of spoiler territory there. You with Persona 5.
Yeah, there's a lot of good games. I mean, it'll make our end of the year, game of the year podcast real fun.
It's going to be a challenge to whittle everything down, though.
Yo.
Like, I feel like I could already rattle off 3 games of the year.
Sure. It'll be interesting.
I don't even know what else is expected to come out this year. Like, I have enough stuff on my plate. I know I know FF15 expansion or 14 expansion is coming. And
well, I know that in itself is going to kind of just straight up wreck a couple months. And not in a bad way. I just mean, like, we're going to be focused on that for a while.
Well, while we're waiting in the DPS queues, we can play other things.
So staying warrior is a good idea, I guess.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. Like, Samurai looks super interesting, and I absolutely want to level one. But, like, so far, nothing has really come along to make me want to stop being a warrior.
Warrior's got lots of nice treats in Heaven's Ward. Like, at this point, I have all 3 tanks at 60. I like playing all 3 of them in different circumstances, and I have no idea which one I want to level first.
Yeah, like, I like the other 2 tanks well enough, but, like, nothing has really felt as glove-like as Warrior. Which is weird, because I remember when we all talked about playing A Realm Reborn, Tam was like, you should really try Warrior. And I was like, but Sword and Shield. And I thought I would be all about the Paladin. But no, I was
playing the Paladin.
Yeah, no. Gladiator is kind of a miserable leveling experience.
Paladin also got a lot better in Heaven's Ward, which is part of why the decision is so difficult.
Well,
I'm extremely nervous about this expansion.
It's going to change a lot of things up if they are even remotely successful at reducing button bloat.
That's not the part that I'm deeply concerned about.
What part are you deeply concerned about?
So putting aside that listening to them give public interviews, they either don't know or don't care that their game has a tank shortage and are doing basically nothing about it. And I'm throwing my hat in with Red Mage, a pure DPS class. It's going to be interesting to see if that's actually functional.
Well, to be fair, though, you had been rocking the Black Mage for a while now.
Yeah, but I never leveled through an expansion with it.
Yeah, true. I mean, functionally, Ash and I are always going to have a tank option. That's just going to be a thing.
I don't know that.
Look, if Blue Mage comes out and it's not a tank, you guys are going to have to find another tank.
Okay.
I mean, we didn't have any tanks. You remember how long we went in Heavensward without having any tanks.
Yeah, which is true. I mean, like, I ran a lot of stuff for everyone.
I was trying to level 2 classes at once, and that didn't really work. So,
no,
not to do that this time, at least.
Yeah, and like, I've I've been able to play a lot of swing, leveling summoner scholar next to one another.
Right.
And so I can fill in for the healer the healer or the DPS that groups need and ease that difficulty because I'm always caught up. And if I go pure DPS, I think that's going to create problems.
So, I mean, to some extent, I'm not as worried about that because, I mean, I have a feeling that Alien will continue to be around, and I believe he would actually rather be healing, and we have Mort and Grace that are probably going to still stick to healing on something. Muspel is mostly a tank.
That's true.
And Celeste has a tank option, and will probably always have a tank option because she really likes being a paladin. I mean, and while she's not on our server, I mean, we have figured out ways to cross-realm group people in now, so I'm not as concerned for us personally. I am super concerned about what the state of the game is going to look like for queue times for literally anyone that doesn't have a pocket tank.
Yeah.
And that's a bad situation, because, like, a lot of times I just want to piddle around. And I know for the first 3 months I will probably be chain running stuff every night, and I can only do that for so long before I start to burn out.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a problem, because as soon as a key tank or healer burns out, we don't do anything. That's like the group stops being able to function. I don't really know what a good solution to that is.
I don't know, because
at this point I can start being sarcastic and say, hey, Guild Wars 2 solved it and doesn't have tanks or healers, but that's totally a lie at this point.
Right?
Yeah. No, they absolutely, like the little bit of running of fractals that we did, it was absolutely 100% that I was a tank.
So, meta for fractals actually does not use a tank. But the raids, however, require one. It's usually over a Mesmer.
I'm just saying, there was a significant difference in my survivability in a quote-unquote tank stance.
Oh, yes.
Than everybody else's. So, they really did put tanks in. Just, they don't call them that. I mean, it is concerning. Heavensward went so smoothly, I feel, because they had a lot of people leveling tank and healer. And even then, there were shortages. The only problem, I think...
several patches for people to start actually playing Astrologian.
Yeah. Because
it launched in a not great state.
Yeah, Astrologian was in a bad place when it first came out.
Dark Knight was a bit more popular because, the raid was first cleared with one. People
I absolutely
noticed
thought
that maybe this is a thing we can actually use.
I thought I would switch to Dark Knight, honestly. Going into Heavensward, I thought I was going to switch to Dark Knight.
Yeah, I mean, Heavensward is really striking to me because it introduced a very popular tank, a pretty unpopular healer, and a pretty unpopular DPS, and tank shortages were still incredible. And now we're going to add 2 extremely popular DPS.
Well, I think the key problem is more a social one than anything, is if you are a tank, your incentive to random queue is not that amazing, because all you have to do is slightly mention that you want to run a dungeon and people will happily hop on board, and your party never makes it out of guild chat or link shell chat or anything where you're actually talking.
Yeah.
So why would you run with strangers when you can make a group happen in seconds? Or at least that's for me. That's a me thing. I do not like random tanking as much as some people might, but by the fact that there's a tank shortage, I'm guessing that's a bigger thing. I don't think a lot of tanks like tanking for random people.
I will tank for people I know gladly.
Yeah, it's
I don't always. It depends on... I will tank easy things for random people. Mostly that's what I've been doing tonight. I've been running random queues as my warrior to get lore so I can finish my weapon. But I don't really like to do experts as a tank, because even though they aren't actually any harder at this point anyway, it just feels like there's more pressure.
Yeah, they're more stressful.
Well, and part of the problem too is in general, we're just not running a lot of experts, so I don't feel like I know the new experts. And that's a stress for me. like, if I don't know immediately how to pull something, like, I feel stressed out because, I mean, better or worse, the tank is the person in the driver's seat of a dungeon run.
Yeah.
I mean, and I guess, like, whenever I tank, I feel a certain level of commitment to the group. Like, I can say I will totally let the group die, but that's not really something that happens. Like, I am going to fight really hard to make sure that they have a good experience.
See,
and
for me in a random group, that depends on how things have gone so far. If things have gone mostly well, then I'll try to make sure they stay going mostly well. If one of the party members happens to maybe be a bit of an asshole, then, well, they can deal with themselves. Unfortunately, if it's the healer, there's nothing I can do about that.
You know, I'd like to say that was the case, but no, I put way too much stress into random groups than I should. Like, if I'm healing, then I don't stress out at all, which is weird. Like, healing is the relaxing random group thing for me. Well, actually, DPSing is the absolute relaxing, because no, I just don't care at that point.
See, for DPSing, I try to feel like I am contributing to the group and not, becoming part of the problem, because melee DPS in this game sure have a reputation for being part of the problem, not an entirely undeserved reputation.
I mean, to be fair, like, when I'm melee DPSing in a random party, I'm not like I'm melee DPSing if you're tanking. Because when you're tanking or when I'm tanking, we are griefy as shit to each other.
Well, yes. It helps keep things more interesting for the other person.
I try very, very hard to not be part of the problem.
Especially as a Dragoon, you're starting out at a deficit already.
I know.
But the same is true with bards, I think. And, we are lucky in that we know some really good bards and some really good Dragoons.
I don't know. Personally, I've had more problem with monks than Dragoons lately.
Which is weird because monk used to be the always solid class. Like, if anyone was playing a monk, period, they kind of knew what they were doing back in A Realm Reborn.
I have no idea what monks you randomed with.
Like, I just didn't encounter monks that often. So, like, if I did, they were usually okay. I have really hit and miss experience with black mages as well.
Black mage experiences have been mostly good. I'll say my caster experiences in general have been mostly good. Monk experiences have been mostly not.
Yeah.
And the ranged physical classes vary a bit. Bards and machinists.
Yeah, I'm running
anyone
machinist.
Find still playing a Dragoon, I find they're doing pretty good.
Yeah. I've noticed that, especially like late Heavensward, anybody who's playing a Dragoon still it's very rare for me to run into like a bad Dragoon at this point, because a lot of the bad Dragoons are playing ninja now.
You can easily tell when they're a bad ninja.
Bunny?
No, I mean, you don't actually see the bunny all that often.
You don't see the bunny. You see the ice spell. You see the earth spell on single targets.
You see them die instantly.
You see that too.
I mean, with the Dragoon changes,
stupid macros.
With the Dragoon changes, though, like, ninja now became the lowest difficulty melee.
That's probably actually true at this point.
Yeah. Because, like, Monk has always been complicated, like, if you were doing it correctly.
But Monk didn't get any more complicated this expansion than it was last expansion. You got two new damage abilities, both of which are off global cooldown. So it didn't get any harder to play.
I mean, I admit
I started off higher than the others.
I was straight up a lol Dragoon. Like, I mostly played it because it didn't require much out of me. So, like, when you put me as a Dragoon up against Brian or Kodra as a Dragoon, it was a noticeable difference. Like, Kodra always did way more damage than I did, because I quite frankly wasn't trying as hard.
I've noticed that my damage output as a black mage is a lot higher than, or feels a lot higher than it was as a summoner. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but
I think that's 5-digit numbers.
I mean, I noticed that things die faster, noticeably faster when I'm on black mage than when I'm on summoner. Because I don't often have the spare bandwidth to look at what my actual numbers are in a fight, unless I'm making a point to.
I feel like a lot of the summoner damage, though, just kind of is invisible, which is weird. Like, and the other problem is like I'm not sure if I can tell the difference between a really good summoner and a really bad summoner.
Archon.
when you group it. Like, I mean, I don't play them often enough to like really know.
Yeah. The easiest way to tell is how hard is it to keep aggro on all of these things at once. That's usually the easiest indication of how well is the summoner doing.
I guess that's true, and there was always a point where I started losing secondary targets with Tam. Like, there was always a moment where nope, I don't have this stuff anymore.
Yeah, and I don't think I think Summoner AoE is basically unparalleled. I mean, I think it's better than even Black Mage AoE.
It is significantly better than Black Mage AoE.
But for most fights that really matter, it's not that different. Like, for most fights that really matter, I'm not getting that bonus. I'm getting my sort of direct bonus.
It probably depends on how much you have to move. Because movement seems to be super brutal for the Black Mage.
Movement is really awful for Black Mages. I mean, that bit in Mechanics the Fight that we were doing, with the if I get the comets on me during the meteor phase, I can't DPS anything until all that stops. Whereas as a summoner, it would be trivial. I would be hitting whatever I could. I wouldn't be doing like a ton of damage, but I'd be doing enough for it to be noticeable versus like literally zero.
I am convinced that AoEs specifically target the little circle on the ground.
I mean, there are a lot of instances in that fight where an AoE targets every single person, so
yeah,
it really doesn't help.
Well, like, even the little bit that I did in Palace of the Dead running up Black Mage, anytime I dropped the circle on the ground, I was going to get targeted by something.
I am really trying to figure out which range DPS I want to bring up, because I have Summoner at 50, I have Black Mage at 50, and then I have Bard and Machinist at 32, and I don't like Bard very much, but I think I kind of like Machinist.
I've been leveling Machinist right now, and it's weird.
It is weird, although not quite as random as everyone seems to say it is.
Well, so the procs are weird, like the 3 main attack procs.
Yeah.
But everything else seems to be fairly sane. I'm just not 100% sure how important getting those procs are.
When you use reload, then that forces procs. And like if you get 1 to proc your 2, then you can use quick reload to force it to proc 3, rather than hoping that it procs 3. So like while it is sort of based on randomness, you can take a lot of it out through use of it's basically their class mechanic.
My only problem with Machinist is it has an excessive number of buttons.
It does have entirely too many buttons.
I mean, like, there's not many buttons that I have that I don't care about.
Yeah, I have this secret. I know that this is a vain hope that is never actually going to be to come true, but I have this secret hope that Red Mage will somehow have a battle raise.
Well, because that's really the thing that you probably miss the most about playing Black Mage.
I mean, it's the thing that makes me feel guilty about playing Black Mage, which I mechanically find more fun than Summoner, but I feel guilty about playing a Black Mage in a group because I'm depriving the group of that extra battle raise, which would be extremely useful.
If they do rebalancing, do you think they either get rid of non-healer battle raise or give that to more people?
Get rid of, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think they get rid of it. If they get rid of it on Summoner, then I go into the expansion with absolutely zero guilt about switching to Red Mage.
Summoners already don't have it in PvP. I'm pretty sure if they could find a way to take it away from them in PvE, they would.
Yeah.
But they can't because it's
a base class ability.
Base class ability, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not as simple, because then you can't, I don't know. I mean, they could maybe make it to where you got a battle res version from your job instead of from your class.
I mean,
currently you can't get any traits via class.
Yeah.
And the Arcanist version is usable in combat regardless.
Yes.
Well, what I mean is, like, instead of a trait, you got like a new version of res that was the battle res version, and they make the base res a non-combat.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, yeah, I can see that happening, where it's like, yeah, you get a raise, but
out of combat.
Well, yeah, I mean, but functionally, like, what, Black Mages can have a raise too, right?
They can't.
Black
the only
Mages
class that can cross-class raise right now that is Paladin, and, well...
Oh,
scholar.
That's right, because the Arcanist raise is not cross-classable.
Right.
So Black mages can't get it. And now that would probably be the less resource-intensive solution, is to say that's a cross-classable skill now, and then Black mages and Red mages and whatever other class can cross-class with Arcanist can have it. And I don't know, I suspect that's not a thing they want to do.
Well, also remember that they're changing the cross-class thing to a cross-roll thing. So Arcanists might lose that ability entirely.
That's true. And that's the thing, is I suspect that what you're going to see is, I don't know, the whole Summoner Scholar thing is, I feel like it's one of the most rewarding classes to play on the whole in the game, because you get so much out of it. But whereas my approach would be, hey, that works really well, we should do more of that, their view seems to be the opposite.
Right. I would love for them to do an expansion where they put in started putting in these classes that were the second half of things. So I got Berserker as a warrior, but I don't think they'll ever do that.
Yeah, you get a cleric paladin offshoot that's a healer. You get I don't know.
Do you know how amazing it would be to have a battle priest that's off of the white mage?
Oh, I was thinking I was thinking that white mage would go time mage. So you'd have
I guess that makes sense too.
So you'd have that, or
a little weird where the spells that normally belong on time mage currently are.
On
Astrologian.
Yeah.
It's sitting on white mage.
What's it sitting on white mage?
Based. You ever seen look at the animation for Presence of Mind?
Ah, yes.
I feel like Paladin's off class would be Mystic Knight.
There are a lot of options because the Gladiator base kit doesn't have a lot of flavor to it.
Yeah, I think that you'd need a combo tank healer somewhere, as opposed to everybody is DPS plus X, and maybe DPS plus X is not necessarily
the worst design.
Yeah. That's not terrible.
Because then you set up the situation that you have with Druid and Shaman and Monk in WoW, that if you're going to only play one character, you should probably play one of those.
Yeah.
So you can play multiple roles. I guess Paladin's in there too.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if every class in Final Fantasy had an off-roll counterpart that leveled up alongside it, so that you get to max level and you can fill 2 roles. I think that solves your queue problem basically immediately.
Time Mage would make an amazing tank.
I think Time Mage and Blue Mage would be hilarious. Would both make for hilarious tanks in completely different ways, but really interestingly.
Blue Mage is weird.
Blue Mage is weird.
Set of spells in FF5 is a toolbox with one concrete damage series.
One amazing concrete damage series.
It's okay. Arrow is not as good as the Black Mage versions of those spells.
Oh, Blue Mage. Sorry, I thought you were talking about Time Mage.
Oh, no. Time Mage has 2 damage spells, one of which is okay and one of which is amazing.
Yeah, I consider that line an amazing line of spells, all told.
Yes. But no, Blue Mages have the Arrow line, which is sort of okay. It is slightly weaker than the standard Black Mage spells, but not enough that it really matters. Blue Mages can still function as functional casters.
I mean, they wouldn't be getting Arrow because that's a White Mage thing.
Right. I'm thinking Blue Mage in FF11 is also a toolbox. They basically have to choose to equip their spells. It can serve as healers or DPS or whatever else based on what you have equipped. And that wouldn't really fly in 14, but they could pick one and assign the appropriate spells for it.
Yeah. Because White Wind is pretty good.
Just pretty good. Yeah, sure.
But yeah, you could have a whole really cool there's a whole bunch of, you could do a bunch of really neat things with blue magic to theme it, because really I don't know that you necessarily need to get all of the blue magic spells.
No, you don't. There are too many of them.
There's too many of them, and most of them are nonsense. But you could get the blue mage feel really, really well. I also think it would be hilariously cool to have blue mage be a caster with a really limited MP pool, but that had a that had an ability on a relatively short cooldown that would cause the next incoming magic damage attack to give it MP and deal no damage.
I figured we'd save that for Mystic Knight.
But blue mages want to stand in the fire. That's the whole point. You could totally get the blue mage feel because you'd like run into an AoE.
I imagine the blue mage story is going to encapsulate the blue mage feel, where
That's what I would expect.
Like your story is going to be
you have a set of class quests, and in that and normally that's what earns you abilities. So
yeah,
you could get the blue mage feel in that.
I just think it'd be funny. Watch your blue mage
bonus
go running
points and
into
Gilgamesh
AoEs.
as the teacher.
So today we're gonna fight Marlboros because you need to learn Bad Breath.
I don't know what game decided to make that a blue mage spell, but maybe it was 8.
I do feel like blue mage is just an inherently funny class, and so you would have to have sort of inherently funny stories.
Where the hell do you even learn Missile in FF4? Oh, I guess there are plenty of Garlands to learn from, I guess.
Yeah, it'd be great. You have Magic Missile. Probably wouldn't have Frog Song.
I don't know, Gilgamesh uses it.
Well, I mean, yes, Gilgamesh uses it, but you probably aren't going to use it. I mean, like, if your blue mage is a tank, Big Guard is the obvious tank limit break.
I think that's already a tank limit break.
Oh, is it
it's
really?
level 2.
Oh, okay.
Although they might take it out and replace it if...
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Flamethrower, Laser, Matra Magic.
If
Actually,
you made,
I don't know if Matra Magic is in other games.
If you made
does
blue mage
weird different things in various games.
If you made blue mage a healer, you could probably make Big Guard like a shield.
Yeah.
All I want to know is, like, if I'm a machinist in Final Fantasy XIV, where the hell's my chainsaw?
We hold on for that one next expansion.
Like, I feel like you could turn machinist into a tank or a healer just by swapping out what you've got equipped.
I mean, you don't have the auto crossbow either.
Yeah. That was kind of all I ever used, usually.
Because when you get it, it's really strong, and it takes a while for it to not be.
Yup. The thing is, like, they have this wealth of classes to draw upon that they would never run out of. Like, especially since they're dipping their toes into the Tactics series, which just have a silly number of classes.
Also, they can invent things. Like, Astrologian is not really a class they had before. It's this weird mix-up of Time Mage and other stuff.
Yeah. It's like Time Mage plus Sage plus some other bits.
Somebody really liked Yu-Gi-Oh!
I play a calculator, though.
Let's not.
That's a totally reasonable class that should be included in any other game ever.
Really, let's not. I just want to know, though, we have Kryle now. Are we going to see, other surviving members of that party? Especially since we're going really hard on the FF5 theme next expansion.
I'm not really sure.
I feel like if any of the other characters are likely, it would be Ferris.
He seems to have become the face of FF5 in basically any place where they didn't use Barts.
Who, Ferris?
World of Final Fantasy has her actually has both of them.
Oh,
but she's a lot more prominent than Barts.
But really, the star of Final Fantasy V is Boko. Just saying. But basically, all of this long conversation we just had about Final Fantasy XIV is why I have a feeling that come July, we will not be dealing with anything else. So I'm trying to get any other gaming in before then.
Speaking of which, I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls 3 this week.
How is that going?
I finally found a boss that I couldn't, power my way through or figure out. And was, getting really frustrated, and then remembered that I could at any point summon a friend to come help me, which is, instantly, with what I knew about the fight, allowed me to beat it. And it still felt really satisfying to kill the guy, which sort of is a reminder to me that, hey, there are ways to make things easier in this game, and you should not feel ashamed about using them.
You remember, even if you summon help, if you die, that person goes back and you don't beat the boss.
Yes, that actually happened the first time. Not mostly because not because he dealt enough damage to me, because I was mostly being safe enough about that, but because he threw me off of a cliff. Aww. And that had never happened to me before, and I found that hilarious.
That seems terribly unfortunate.
I tried again and killed him. Yeah. Yeah, being thrown off a cliff does not help. But a lot of the bosses become noticeably easier when there is somebody, like, one person can be running away from the boss while the other one slashes at its rear. And then if the boss ever turns and faces you, you run away, and the other person comes and slashes at his rear. It's a pretty effective tactic.
Poke all the butts.
That is definitely the mantra of a lot of Dark Souls 3 fights. And Champion Gundyr is really, really tough. He's the very first boss, only much more aggressive. Much more aggressive. It's kind of funny to me how much they can take that fight from being like your soft introduction to the game to a punishingly difficult fight by just not giving them any frames of downtime.
So does Dark Souls have invulnerability frames?
Yes, it does.
If you have the good roll, yes.
Even if you have the medium roll.
Really?
Yeah. Not if you have the fat roll. So you have a carrying capacity based on your vigor, and like your max carrying capacity is a certain amount of pounds of equipped gear, which includes any equipped weaponry, all of your armor, all of your rings. If you are under 30% or under your max weight, you have the fast roll, which is tons of iframes and very, very long and very, very fast. Anywhere from 30 to 70% is the medium roll, which still gives you a decent number of iframes. And shorter roll, a little bit less responsive. And then over 70, like, you will hit the ground and then sort of push yourself back up. And, like, the controller will rumble in your hands if you have that on. It's not...
You
don't
at this
get
stage,
iframes with
you should
that.
forget that you have a roll. You should find a really great shield.
Yeah, you should find a really great shield. That's... I mean, typically when you're at that weight limit, it's because you have
you're carrying
a really great
stupid shield. But I also think, I don't know if this is still true in 3, some characters start the game equipped to that weight limit. Temple Knight in Demon Souls did.
Interesting.
So with a halberd, which is kind of big, and heavy armor, and not nearly enough vigor for these things.
I mean, I definitely spend a lot of points into vigor so that I can... And I wear jewelry that allows me to wear more equipment. So I am wearing exile gear, which is pretty heavy armor. Not the heaviest. Like, pretty sure Smaug's armor is heavier. I'm pretty sure the Katarina set is heavier.
That return, really?
What?
Did that return, really?
Of course. Katarinans are in every single game.
That is ugly as sin. Oh.
It is ugly as sin. You get to play with Siegward of Katarina in one of the fights if you do his quest, which I did, and it was awesome.
One way to describe this might be as Onion Knight gear, although it's not what you're thinking. Like, makes you look like an onion.
It does.
Oh, that set.
Yes.
I never understood what that was. I thought maybe it was like a weird boss.
That's armor you can get and wear.
They're really very thoughtful knights. They most, like, you meet them and they mostly sit there and hum and don't even pay you mind until you, like, talk to them again, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't even see you there." Siegward has his armor stolen from you. You have to recover it and give it back to him. I don't wear it. It looks ugly. Exile looks like big furs and metal, so I'm into it.
This was why I got into Neo a lot more than I did Dark Souls. Because the Dark Souls aesthetic is very much that, like, classic gothic, super heavy armor and big clanking plate mail and so on. Like it's, I don't know. I don't have a good word for it.
I mean, it's definitely gothic. Like, even the light armor is pretty... It's light, but it's, like, old church robes.
Yeah. And that is not an aesthetic that does a lot for me. Like, none of... I don't... I mean, even when I like plate armor, I like a particular kind of sleek plate armor that is not reflected in that game mostly. Whereas I like most of the gear in Neo. And I thought I would like the gear in Bloodborne more than I did.
Oh, I love the gear in Bloodborne.
I don't like tattered. I don't like when my armor or my coat or whatever is tattered. That's a look that I really don't like, and that's like basically all of the gear in Bloodborne.
Yeah, okay. So that is definitely the Dark Souls, the Souls aesthetic is the like you are inhabiting a lived through world. You're inhabiting a world that is at the end of its journey. Like, you're telling the final tale of this place. Like, the champion Gundyr fight actually is... So, the very first boss in the very first area of Dark Souls 3 gets repeated for the champion Gundyr fight, but the entire sky is pitch black in this area because it represents a world where they failed to relink the fires, and it became, and the Age of Fire ended, and the Age of Darkness began. Like, you are clinging to this world where you are trying to decide what to do with it at its end of life. Which, I mean...
Maybe they ran out of time to repair their clothes.
What?
Maybe they ran out of time to repair their clothes.
Maybe.
Speaking of post-apoc type settings where everything's going horrible, what I want to know is in, like, all of these post-apocalyptic television shows, who the hell is going around mowing the lawns? Because, like, it doesn't matter if it's a zombie show or, like, society has ended because, like, you know, some other reason. They still have manicured lawns.
I have no idea how to respond to
that. I think this is part of the reason why I like anime and video games for that kind of setting, because, I don't know, I always notice the little things that bug me in them. But I straight up derailed the Dark Souls conversation.
It's fine. I really like the way the game allows you to set the difficulty you want and, like, sort of figure out whether or not you need to make things easier or whether, like, the difficulty is at the right level for you. It starts
as long
off
as you're okay
very...
with the baseline being fairly high.
The baseline is very high, although I always seem to find a point in Dark Souls games where I start to just crunch my way through stuff because I've allowed myself to become more powerful than the content I'm currently facing. And, like, you can get into a pretty good rhythm until the end of the game where they start spiking up the difficulty a bit more and it puts the brakes on you.
So we seem to have wound down. Any other topics that we want to discuss?
So I put like 20 hours into Persona 5 this week, at least. And I've spent the last, like, basically entire day trying to figure out, of all of the things I want to talk about with this game, what I can get away with talking about. But, like, I don't know, it's hard because it's an incredibly good game that is doing a whole bunch of really interesting things. I love Persona 4, and I definitely like... Persona 5 doesn't replace it because they manage to be very different games despite being structured almost identically. So I can't say, like, oh, well, you know, Persona 5 is just better than 4, but it's really, really good in a lot of really interesting ways. And it replaces some of the there's some really brokenly powerful stuff from 4 that doesn't exist in 5, and I'm realizing exactly how dependent I had been on it. Like having MP, or the game's equivalent of MP. My progress in dungeons is basically entirely determined by not do I level up enough to get through this, but do I have the resources to make it?
That was intended to be the challenge in P4 as well. Just that one particular social link breaks that in half.
Yes. And I find that kind of interesting. I found the thing that I think is the replacement for that, though. Like here's a mechanic that if you know how to use it is stupidly powerful, which is so every Persona game has the utterly hateful what's this called, like Velvet Room assistant link, where what they want you to do is they'll say, hey, get me
this persona with this skill.
Yes, this persona with this ability. Don't care how you do it, just get it for me. And some of those are a huge pain, like just an enormous huge pain, but they reward. Like, I never felt like the rewards for doing that were all that worth it in like Persona 4, for example.
Primary reward for doing that is the persona you were asked for, because it's probably something really useful.
Yeah, and it's like, sure, that's useful, but like I went through a lot of trouble to get that, and so usually I just like did that all on New Game Plus when I had the whole thing, because it was rarely like it was usually a really good persona, but not one that I was necessarily fit with what I was trying to do. But they seem to agree. And so you get a whole bunch of new like Velvet Room abilities as you go through this social link, culminating in, at rank 10, they're like, okay, if you pay us some money, we will ignore your level when merging a new persona.
What?
Yeah.
So just for background, as the main character, your level is only used to determine what personas you can fuse.
Yes.
Because all of your stats come from your current persona.
Yes. And so you can be like, let me
just get to the end of this book, please. Can you just give me that one?
Now, the amount of money they charge you is a lot.
Oh.
And it goes up with the
level difference.
With the level difference. This did not stop me.
Seems like it could be a worthwhile investment.
It was an investment that I could make once. So I had to do it judiciously because it was real expensive. It was like, let's be totally clear. It was real expensive. But it was really good. I got Thor, which is like level 72 or something, at level 50.
Is that one of the rank 10 social link rewards as well?
I don't think so, but he started with Zeodyne.
Good enough.
And he started with Dyne level spells at a point where most of the rest of my party hasn't gotten a Dyne spell yet, except for my very highest level ones. But it's a super powerful mechanic. They gate, one of the things I think is really, really, really neat is they gate a lot of game mechanics behind social links, because it's under the auspices of it is your social link teaching you how to play, how to do whatever thing. And so, like one of the other social links, the very first thing that you get is, on the main character's turn, you can swap out a party member as your turn. And that changes the party dynamic hugely.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I play the game super differently. The other one is Baton Pass, which is if you get a one more, you can pass your bonus turn to anybody else who has unlocked Baton Pass. Main character starts with Baton Pass unlocked. And the more subsequent passes of the baton, you get bonus power. So you can set up and then there are like physical attack abilities that explicitly get boosts from if you pass the baton to the person who uses that ability. Like, basically, this ability gets buffed if it's used when you pass the baton to the character using it. And, like, that's really interesting. But it also means that, because you're talking about difficulty, and it kind of made me think about it, like, basic encounters in Persona 5 are a lot harder. Like, much, much more difficult than Persona 4. To the point where you kind of don't want, like, you just kind of don't want your enemies to get a turn ever, because enemies will intelligently exploit your weaknesses if they can figure them out. And so, like, you can get comboed to death if you're not careful. And that's super awkward. Just like, oh, regular encounter. Whoops.
Exploit. I had a boss combo me to death in P4, but not, a normal enemy.
Yeah, I've had normal enemies combo me to death more than I care to admit in P5. Especially because they put a lot more emphasis on ambushing. There's a lot.
I mean, you are a rogue.
Yes, the ambush mechanic that existed in Persona 3 and 4, which is like use your sword attack on an enemy's back to get an ambush, and it was really, really janky, has been completely replaced. And there's a much more in-depth system for doing that, but it also is way more punishing if you don't ambush or an enemy ambushes you. But like all of this makes for a really, really interesting, like just mechanically the game is really interesting, especially because they added effectively 5 more element types. I mean, technically they did have light and dark before, but they only had one move type each, and it was pretty binary, whereas it's no longer the case. There's like regular damaging light and dark moves, and then you have to worry about psychic and nuclear, and everybody has a main weapon and a gun. So there's all of these different dimensions of making the puzzles that are the fights. But long story short, the game is really, really good. I don't know. I want to talk about this game so much more than I have been able to, but I completely understand why they're so like obsessive about blocking spoilers. Because like right now I am hungrily playing this game to find out how it resolves, because oh wow, it also has a delightful cast of characters. I can say with a lot of confidence at this point that my worry from, was it last week or the week before, where I'd started playing and was like, wow, this game is super, super dark.
Yeah, I think that was 2 weeks ago.
It is super, super dark. Like, it actually gets darker from where I was at. But as I was kind of hoping, it is a game about finding joy in darkness. And I think that's really cool. Like, things aren't great, and we're not going to pretend that they're great, but that doesn't mean that we can't be happy. And I think it's a really complex but interesting message to package into a game experience. I also have to echo Ammo's comment from a few days back, where she said, it's really cool that your part-time job doesn't mind that you show up basically never.
Wasn't that also true in 4?
Yeah.
Look, if you answer correctly, you only need to show up 10 times total.
To any given one, or all of them? Oh yeah,
any given one.
Yeah, any given one. They don't hide social links behind part-time jobs anymore.
That's good.
Like, sometimes you have to go to a part-time job to unlock one, but it's not like you've got to go work at your part-time job just to connect with a social link. But that means that there's a billion things to do in the game. Like, it's completely insane. Also, they give you... I don't remember. In 4, do people blow up your cell phone just constantly?
Not usually. Every so often there are a few days where you will get a few offers of things to do that day.
Yeah. So, in P5, your phone is blowing up basically nonstop. Like, you're constantly getting text messages. Your friends call you in the middle of the night. The character will pull out their phone in the middle of, like, from being woken up in the middle of the night and pull out their phone and be like, with a look like, what even is this? Why are we being called? It's enough that other characters comment on it. It's really funny. Anyway, if you even think you might like this game, I highly recommend it. I also take back my original thought that Kodra would not be into it.
You think I'll be
Gotta
into
do
it
the opening.
now?
So, I think that you will find the opening kind of rough until you realize what the entire point of the game is, and then you'll be like, okay, this is great. Like, the entire point of the game is fighting these oppressive powers, and, like, we openly are going to talk about these powers being oppressive and shitty, and are going to do something about it. But yeah, it's a game story that has genuinely surprised me a couple of times in the places it goes, and I'm really excited about that, because I am that person who 20 minutes into a movie is pretty sure they know how the ending is going to go, and is usually not wrong. And so it's really fun to have a game that keeps me guessing.
Okay. Any other topics?
Don't think so.
We're good.
Well, I believe next week is the Game of the Month show? Yes? No?
Yes.
Moon Hunters.
A game I need to make actual traction in.
I've gotten several bad endings.
I've done this too.
I got a goodish end.
I really want to play co-op, because I feel like this game gets really interesting and really weird co-op.
Seems likely.
So that may be a thing that I try to do this week.
Well, join us next week as we talk about our experiences with that game. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again next week. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you.